And we go to about to about an hour and 30 minutes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the System of Care Academy. This is our 10th anniversary, and we are excited to be here today. My name is Lee Taylor, and on behalf of the co-conveners, the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities, and Mental Health America of Kentucky, we just want to welcome everyone. Our theme this year is celebrating our system of care, past, present, and future. And so we're glad that you're here to celebrate with us. Also, a special thank you to the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities Equity Team for their ongoing efforts to enhance behavioral health equity, which helped make today's event possible. I have 2 slides that I'm going to share with you before we get into the real reason we're here, and that's to hear Judge Mitchell. So as I put in chat a second ago, our webinar, we're in webinar mode. So that means that all attendees are muted and your videos are off. You are not required to sign in via the chat. Zoom captured your sign in when you entered your email address to enter. Please use the Q&A box for any questions for Judge Mitchell, and all other questions, please enter those in the chat box. That'll help us keep it sorted out, which ones go to Judge Mitchell and which ones we need to answer in the meantime. We have American Sign Language interpreters with us today. So they're going to be on your screen throughout the session. We also are using live captioning. So if you do not see that on your screen, please click on the CC button at the bottom, and that should turn it on. So if you've been multitasking, here's when you want to start tuning in. It's all about continuing education and certificates of attendance. You must be in the content portion of the webinar for at least 90% of the session to be eligible for a certificate. And this is a mandate by the boards. We cannot give partial credit. Also, you must use the same email address when registering for and entering each session. Your email address is the unique identifier used to track attendance for certificates. If you did not register or did not sign in with your email address, you will not be eligible for a certificate. Within 2 weeks, attendees who were present for that 90% of the session will receive an email with a session evaluation link. You must complete the session evaluation to proceed to the certificate. And you are responsible for saving or printing your certificate. Academy staff do not mail or email those anymore. Participants can return to the website at any time to access those certificates from 2019 through 2014. And that link will it'll come in an email later, but I'll also drop it in the chat box here in a minute. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Judge Mitchell. Our session today is supporting children and families, trauma healing, and reconnection through the court process. Judge Mitchell is a fierce advocate for education and equity. He presides over the Juvenile Division in Branch 4 and hears cases involving family reunification, juvenile delinquency, and other civil and criminal proceedings. Judge Mitchell also oversees Dane County's high-risk drug court program. Judge Mitchell's lived experience in foster care, as well as his formal education of a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics and Religion from Morehouse College, Master of Divinity and Master of Theology from Princeton Theological Seminary, and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I know that part of his presentation is going to include more background about him. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Judge Mitchell.
Lee, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for the opportunity to be here with you today to share in what I'm very passionate about related to supporting children and families and the roles that we play in the work we do. I'm glad to be here with you today for Madison, Wisconsin, and to just share part of my passion for you. I'll share my screen, and as Lee pointed out, as questions may come up or things that may come up, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to answer those questions as we can. And we will do our best. At least I'll do my best to be engaging. I will say that the direction of this is a mixture between me talking and then watching videos, because I just hate doing Zoom where a person is just talking for an hour and a half. So I intentionally break up with videos that are important to me that I use to help facilitate and strengthen this sort of conversation among not only my colleagues, but here in the state of Wisconsin and other places. So I appreciate you, and I hope that this time that we have together is both instructive and informative and gives you a little bit more about my passion, my desire, and the ways that I use the court system as a judge to support our families here. And hopefully these ideas will support you as Kentucky is pulling together to build its system of care in a manner that we want to see, which is addressing the trauma and the pain of our children and our families, and doing it in such a way that leaves them whole and strong at the same time. So I'll share my screen. All right. As Liz already talked about, I'm the presiding judge of our juvenile division here in Dane County. I'm also senior pastor of Christ the Solid Rock Church here in Madison, so I have a couple jobs. But my unique role as a judge and as a pastor allows me to say a couple things about me. I've been elected since 2016, senior pastor of our church since 2011. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Law School, where I teach courses on race, racism, and the law, as well as to a course on juvenile justice administration. I'm the presiding judge over our juvenile division. I run our high-risk drug court program for Dane County. As you already heard, I'm a graduate of Morehouse College, Princeton Theological Seminary, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison Law School. I'm also a sexual abuse trauma survivor, both as a witness to my sister's abuse and in doing my own abuse. So that also informs how I think about our casework and the work that we do with our social workers. I always say I'm living with mental wellness or post-traumatic stress disorder for the years of witnessing so much abuse in our family. I've been in recovery for over 15 years. I believe in justice, listening, and healing as values. And then I'm an activist, I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I'm a friend. So everything about this work requires us to think about what are some of the guiding principles that help to strengthen what we do. One of the things that I've always focused on is this quote by Brian Stevenson, which helps me to better inform and also educate those in our community about why we do this work in the first place. He said, "We've submitted to the harsh instinct to crush those among us whose brokenness is most visible, but simply punishing the broken or walking away from them or hiding them from sight only ensures that they remain broken, and we do too." This quote is very important to me because in our systems, especially child welfare and the systems where we're working with families, it's very confidential. And so it's hidden. And so, when it's hidden, that means that it's not, available for that deep introspection that you need sometimes to hold systems accountable. So that means that the people that are within the system who are truly hidden behind this, what I call behind the veil of confidentiality, really have to be very intentional to ensure that those that we have responsibility for are not crushed by the weight of the system or crushed by the weight of all of the inconsistencies that we sometimes see within the systems themselves. So I believe everybody ought to have some guiding principles. And for me, this one by Brian Stevenson is one that always stays back in my consciousness and reminds me that we ought to be doing this work with some intentionality so that people don't remain broken, families don't remain broken, children are not remain broken. In many ways, the trauma of the adults are not broken as well. And then I came across this quote shortly after I was elected by Frederick Douglass, when he says, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men," and I always add women. But the notion that sometimes we will wait until children are already broken in order to try to fix them. And my thing is like, how do we build strong children, especially when they come into our system, and not leave them to the adult systems or adult criminal justice system to figure it out? How do we make sure the trauma and the things that they experience now can be addressed in a way that gives them permission to be strong, so that they don't need repairing, they don't need the need to access some of the other things in our society that are built to, bring restorative principles to brokenness. And a lot of that came from the fact that I worked as a restorative justice coordinator running prisoner reentry programs. And all of my clients that I would see, they had the similar stories, whether they were sex offenders or, using drugs or just in prison for a number of different things. They all had similar life experiences where they were in either the foster care system or the child welfare system or the juvenile justice system, and they just kind of graduated over time into the adult system, which ultimately made them worse. So there are stories as a judge that that stay with you. There are stories that impact you a lot when it comes to how am I as a judge going to make sure that the work that I do with my social workers and my staff and the systems partners that we relate to impact. And there are two stories that always stayed with me. One is the story of a white mother and a black mother that was similar in when I first came into court, and they were, both facing the termination of their parental rights. Black mother, she lost her children, but she worked hard to get her children back. She had a horrible relationship with the previous judge, had a horrible relationship with the social worker, and had a horrible relationship with the guardian ad litem. Generally, if you have those three in a horrible relationship, then you're going to lose your children. But when I took over the court, I would start asking the question, what is the safety concern that we have related to this mother, so that we can move beyond personality and move into a place of safety and concern for the children. And I could not get a safety concern. And so because I could not get a safety concern as a new judge, and that they could articulate to me, that was not mired in the personality conflicts between a guardian ad litem or previous judge or social worker, I returned her children back to her. Another case was with a white mother. She lost her boys because of an abusive boyfriend, which was very interesting to me, because she left him, but the department still wanted to move toward terminating her parental rights, mainly because the personalities of the two did not get along. They didn't get along with the social worker, did not get along with the guardian ad litem. She was very crass and her language was bad, but she loved her boys and she worked hard to, support her boys. And so I declined to terminate her parental rights, and it angered the department and the prosecuting attorney, such that they, tried to appeal and overturn my decision and said a lot of bad, mean, racist things inside their attempt to overturn my decision. Ultimately, I was upheld by the appellate court, but it was just a reminder to me in those moments that this stuff, it can become personal. And when it becomes personal, not statutorily, you find out why people are so angry and why people feel that the system is against them. And it didn't matter if you were black or white. Once you come into the system itself has a way to responding. And then I started working with incarcerated parents. I had an incarcerated father. He struggled with drugs, substance abuse disorder. The drugs kept him in and out of prison. When he was sober, he was out. When he was using, he would end up, stealing and picking up new charges. His sons, though, were born while they were sober, while he was sober. And they were born into intensive care. They were twins. And he stayed home with them for months in the ICU and the NICU until his sons were able to come home. Every night he was there. He was there nurturing them, holding them, making sure that they had the skin-to-skin contact. He was there at the hospital. He was always there with his sons. And then as life happens, the mother unexpectedly dies while he's incarcerated. And there's an adoptive family that wants to adopt the boys. And so he's attempting from prison to get his children back. But, COVID happens and the prison shuts down all visits. He shut down all video visits, not only just visits, but videos and everything while he's incarcerated. And then they want to, they wouldn't even allow him to have stamped envelopes because they treated the stamped envelopes as contraband. And so when the county filed for termination of parental rights, when they had parental rights, when they did that, I started to listen to his efforts to try his best to stay in contact with his kids. And when I listened to his efforts to try to come in contact with his kids, I saw that the system, the institution itself, was prohibiting for him meeting his conditions of return. So I'm asking the question, should his rights be terminated? And fortunately, that one didn't have to come to me. The jury said no, that they didn't meet the grounds, that he was trying to be there for his children, but the institution would not allow that to happen. So I give those stories as an examples because, and this father was white, because, typically Kentucky looks a lot like Madison and Wisconsin in terms of its demographics. We have a lot of disparities related to our systems, but as a judge, I'm noticing there's these paradigms that kind of hang over the system, and that sometimes people do not feel like they're being justly heard because of the implications of what the system has done for them and done to them, and not listen to them in the process. So as a judge, I'm an arbitrator. I don't have friends on either side. I'm just listening for the facts and how they align to statute, and try to make conscious and thoughtful decisions about all the many different things that can impact the ability for a person to be a parent. And while sometimes love is not enough, there also has to be some consistency and awareness of when people are making efforts, what are the real systemic barriers that are stopping this from happening at the same time. I had a woman with, I will say that, and we'll talk about this case in a second, substance abuse disorder. This is becoming a higher concern for all of us in the state of Wisconsin, as I'm sure in Kentucky as well, as there are more kids coming into our care now because of the opiate crisis that we have never seen before. And I think the rise of overdoses, like this mother here who overdosed with the kids in a running car, not only was she overdosed, but she was formally charged in the criminal justice system because of the fact that she overdosed with the kids in the car. She pled into a high-risk drug court program, which I ran and which I run. But then not only did she have a criminal case, she was in drug court. The county opened up a CHIPS case and took custody of the two children. And that's why I started to rethink then, how do we ensure that these cases don't conflict with each other, but then we try to make sure that we align them. And then I'll talk a little bit later about how we can intentionally, as a court system, and be thoughtful about the alignment of criminal cases, CHIPS cases, so that we can be able to support each other and the goals of the parents can be established, then the children can be protected, and everybody's moving in a pro-social direction at the same time. So, and we'll talk about some of those examples in a second as we kind of go through this experience. But I want to just leave you with this, if there's anything that you walk away with the notion of in this system, is understand that I have a philosophy that I'm trying to impose upon our system. And one of the things is I talk about, people talk about school to prison pipeline. That is not the pipeline that I think is impacting our adult prison system. I think the pipeline that is impacting our system is a child welfare to juvenile delinquency to adult prison pipeline. And this is the pipeline where I think this is happening. So you will see that the child welfare system and different things that we see here, from pervasive poverty to inadequate health and mental health care, generational. And when I say this, I really do mean generational involvement in the child welfare system. If you've been working in this system, and I've been doing this for over 20 years, I see second and third generations of families in the child welfare system, children in need of protection and services, juveniles in need of protection and services in foster home, in group homes, in residential treatments. A lot of parents are terminated parental rights cases, TPRs, and experiencing chronic abuse and neglect. And many of those young people end up in the juvenile justice system and going to out of state, moving around, and then ultimately end up in the adult criminal justice system. And so it has become very important how we manage and how we build expectations as it relates to the child welfare system in general, so that we can make sure that we are being very intentional about reducing the number of people that are moving through these other systems at the same time. If we're doing our job consistently and conscientiously and intentionally well, then the disparity that we see on the adult criminal justice system side will become minimal, because we are able to maximize the community and the supports that we need to address the trauma, so it doesn't just continue on for another generation. And so, I'll give you some strategies that I've chosen to use as a judge to help bring about more awareness over time about what that looks like, and give us some understanding of what are some possibilities of transforming this pipeline into something that is beautiful long term. But before you do that, you have to start with some basis of child welfare and the stigma that exists within the minds of those who have been through the system many times before. There's a couple books that I teach in my classes when I teach my juvenile justice course that are important. One book is Torn Apart, and she gives some language in here that reflects the exact experience that a lot of families of color experience when they are brought into a child welfare system, especially when that child welfare system is ran by the majority population. And that sometimes causes an immediate visceral mistrust that they're following into a subconscious pattern that has already existed. And this other book called Confronting the Racist Legacy of the American Child Welfare System. Both of them have quotes in here that I thought were very interesting. One, it says that since its inception, the United States has wielded child removal to terrorize, control, and disintegrate racialized populations. Enslaved African families, emancipated Black children held captive as apprentices by their former enslavers, indigenous children kidnapped and confined to boarding schools, or just some of the big examples of how what they think about child welfare is a terrorizing, controlling, and disintegrating tool that has inflicted and impacted so many communities of color. And even now, when we think about the ways in which immigration is being used to pull children away from families, it continues to be a tool that is often used under the guise of safety concerns for families over time. And she continues, as she says it, today's child welfare machine, which systematically demolishes Black families, can trace its roots directly back to these practices designed to uphold racial capitalism over the course of human history. It is a reminder to us. Let me go back. It is a reminder to me. It's called Confronting the Racist Legacy of the American Child Welfare System. These books, again, we'll make sure we have the slides so you can always be able to go back and look at those again. And then she calls it family policing. She calls it family policing continues to take children hostage in order to wield control over communities that are ravaged by economic exploitation, disinvestment, and state violence. So when you hear those statements, as a person who's inside the system myself, it is a reminder to me that there is a historical legacy that still stays with us, because, like I said, it's confidential and it hasn't changed, it hasn't quite been adapted yet, and we haven't been able to always undo and unpack the complexity of what this means. But the idea of a family policing model makes sense based on sometimes what I see and how we engage families. We don't engage them to look at what their strengths are. We also, in many ways, they come to us and people would place judgments on family structures and how people raise their children, and that could become more of a policing model rather than a family support model. In the book, Confronting the Racist Legacy of the American Child Welfare System, he refers to the child welfare system as, again, the family policing system, which includes surveillance, regulation, and punishment. And then he says that while the system purports these separations based on the need for protection, which is generally the standard of safety and protecting, The outcome is the same: the subjugation of Black families at the hands of the state for the purposes of maintaining white power. Now, when I say that to most audiences, they either like, well, I'm not, working to maintain, a system of white power. That's not what we're doing. We're just trying to make sure that, kids are safe. And I always remind my social workers and those who are working in with us, I said, we have to ask the fundamental questions about, if we're not trying to perpetuate the system, how are we asking questions that are different? Like, for example, as a judge who sentences children to like jail, I started asking questions about the reading literacy of our children. And so, I had gotten a report about a young kid, he just all kinds of trouble, they want me to waive him to adult court. And so right before I was getting ready to make my sentence determination on him, I read that, he's 16 years old and he reads at a third grade level. His math is only a fourth grade level. And I asked the question, I said, why am I just now seeing that this is his reading level and math level? And so because of his case, I started asking among all my cases, what are their reading levels? Right? Before you ask me for higher levels of sentencing, I'm going to start asking you, how do they read? How do they process mathematics? Because you can't ding them for not showing up to class or not doing independent work on a computer when at the same time they're not allowed or they don't have the skills, or we have not given them the skills to even read as a third grader, as a 16-year-old. Like that is a component that we have to pay attention to and we have to be conscious of, because if we're not, all we're doing is perpetuating the same systemic cause at the same time. So I started asking those fundamental questions, because not so much because I think, I'm just high, I'm a high judge, or, I got all this stuff, no, I'm asking the question because fundamentally at the end of the day, I don't want more broken children to be released into the community without the skills necessary. And because, as you hear, a little bit later, I grew up as a kid who couldn't read. And I know how frustrating and embarrassing that is when you have lived your life of trauma trying to survive and you can't read, and then people judge you for the fact that you can't, independently engage like every other kid. And so I'm a judge now, obviously, and people, can see that. But, there was a time when I'm illiterate, I can't read. All I'm trying to do is survive for 12 years. And education is not at the top of my list because you're homeless and you're getting abuse and you're looking at abuse. All of the things that build up over time, ultimately can distract you from doing that. But it's up to us as system partners to not only ask the question, but then do something about making sure that that gets resolved at the same time so that we're not perpetuating. In Wisconsin, we have goals. So as a judge, I'm always looking at what are the goals that we're trying to meet. And there are several stated goals as a judge that help guide the statutory decisions that we're supposed to make. I know a lot of this stuff can feel emotional. And so the only way sometimes to divorce the emotional way is to make sure that we're asking, are we meeting our goals? Are we checking the goals off and making sure that we focus on the things that we're paying attention to? And yes, I focus on disability as well. We ask, I'm starting to understand that there are a lot of disability that we don't address. And then, if we have more time, I could talk to you even about, how IEPs, individualized education plans, were often used in such a way where, schools were violating the children's, civil rights to education. And they weren't, using and doing what they were supposed to do to support these young people who had what we now, used to be special education, but individualized education plans to give them the kinds of services and wrap them around that they needed. Like again, I said, we're hidden behind this veil, and if you don't tell them, it doesn't happen. One of the things that is confusing to a lot of my families was what I call the number of child welfare actors that are in our process. It is so many people that are engaging families. And when I teach my course, my students come to the class with this understanding, like maybe it's one person or two people. But I explain to them, these are all the kinds of people that are in the process of a family. And so you may go from just a family operating, just independent, to having all these different people who are now involved in the very nature of how you make decisions about your family and your children. And that really does impact the ability for people to understand who's in the room and how do we explain what's in the room, how do we address what's in the room, how do we deal with what's in the room. And it's just a lot. It's just a lot of people. And so just explaining that and helping people conceptualize all these different people who have input into the decisions that will happen in people's lives is just a feat in and of itself, to be able to explain who these people are, what they mean, and why they will be impacting your life. Even the terminology we use. So I made the mistake already because I noticed somebody asked the question, "What is CHIPS?" Because we use acronyms all the time, and we use the acronyms so interchangeably all the time without explaining exactly what they mean. And so if you've never had this stuff come into you, there are whole hearings where we just using acronyms. Did the parent file a COP because we have a standing ICPC, but we need to appoint a PRP because we might have to use an RCC. But if we go to disposition, we may have to put a CAS worker in place, but we've got to make sure that they're dealing with either the ROS or that we're doing with the CORs. But if they don't deal with the CORs or the ROS, then may have to move to a TPR. But if we don't, do we need to issue KBS? If they, all of these words we throw out there, assuming that people who come into the system understand them. But sometimes even the terminology in and of itself creates the ultimate confusion. And so this is why I think for us, what we're trying to do is pull back on this idea, slow it down a little bit. We don't have to rush through every hearing. We don't have to just click it off, check it off, and just do nothing else. We can spend time to making sure that we are spending time to have a conversation and really talk about ways in which we want families to understand processes, and we want them to understand what this means for them, because at the end of the day, it's their lives that are going to be impacted by this long term. So what are some of the goals that we have? Some of the goals is about health and safety of children. We want to make sure that children are health and safety are paramount concerns. For us, paramount is the highest concern. So I want to make sure that they are at the highest level of concern. So we focus on that. Secondly, the idea of strengthening families. What does it mean to strengthen a family? It means we want to make sure that we're assisting parents whenever appropriate in fulfilling their responsibilities. So we want to give them the assistance that they need. What is it? I don't know. Every parent, every situation is so unique, but we want to make sure that we assisting them in this goal. So I'm looking at the health of children. I'm looking at what services can assist this family in making sure that they get what they need. And that's what I'm focusing on. Right when the case comes in, I'm looking very clearly at what can I assist them with and how can we start to work to make sure that those things get put in place. I'm not the kind of judge that sits around and says, well, we don't have. If a parent or family system needs it, then we need to make sure that we can assist them with getting it. And, I'm just flexible enough to be able to do a couple of things in our community. I want to assist the parents with changing any circumstance in the home at which might harm the child or the unborn child. And when we talk about assisting them in changing it, sometimes poverty looks funny to people who don't know it. So, rather than, necessarily the court having a fist of jurisdiction to control a family, they may need to know how to clean a house or, diaper a child, or how to, feed children, or to cook, and to, how do we make sure that we change the circumstances that brought them to us in the first place, and be creative about what that looks like, and not assume that everybody comes to the situation with the conditions and understanding of how to do that. Sometimes we have to, ensure that when children are placed outside the home, how do we do that? What are some ways for us to do that in a thoughtful and conscientious way? Sometimes we have to keep children out of home and not with their family. And that is a hard decision when we have to be in a position where we do not reunite a child with his or her family because it's not appropriate to do so. And what does that mean? How do you explain that to not only to the parents, but also to the children when it is the case? I noticed when we first started this work, like my social workers never gave me pictures of the children that we were working with. And so I'm like, I'm not going to be a judge over faceless, nameless children. Like I may know their name, but I need to see them. I want to see their faces. I want to see what they look like. And if we have to, you're gonna bring them into court. But I don't want a guardian ad litem just representing. I need to see who I'm talking about. I need to see who I'm making these decisions for. And then we want to achieve permanency. And that's the important thing too. How do we make sure that there's some not so much instability, but making sure that we give them an opportunity to have something that's permanent? And then reduce the time of child, eliminating the need for children to wait unreasonable periods of time. I always ask the question, how long? How long do we give a parent to make the change in the life of a child? How long do we give? And that is not, I know we have social theorists and everybody will come up with numbers. We give 12 months, 5 months, 6 months, 3 years, how much? But when you look through the life of a child, how much time do we give for parents to be able to make the change so that we can make sure that they're both moving in a positive direction? In Wisconsin, we have 15 out of 22 months. We got 15 months once the case comes in before the county is in position to be able to file that TPR case. So we got 15 months. And so the moment that a case comes in, I treat it like 15 months. I'm like, we need to be on this case, review hearings, everything, because that 15-month is coming. And how do we get there? We can't just wait for a parent plan review every 6 months. We have to make sure we're intentional about making sure that the children are getting what they need as quickly as they can. All right. So this is why I want to make sure that we are working very consistently and passionately to ensure that they're getting what they need up front and boat loading a lot of services up front. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of trauma. As a judge, I champion education around trauma. I don't think a lot of my colleagues have a good understanding of trauma. And so because they don't, they sometimes make decisions or say things that make situations worse for families in a very difficult way. But for me, I realize that trauma can be passed down, and so and it leaves traces. And so, what we're trying to do is be a stopgap to stop a lot of the trauma that goes from one generation to the next, and to give us an opportunity to really address how we do this. I do a lot of education with our judges. I think, every state has a judicial education board that is supposed to give that opportunity for people to learn this information from the bench. I think even before they go to the bench, you have opportunities to educate lawyers about trauma, because, judges have to come as lawyers. So lawyers should do that. And even going even further back into education. That's why I started teaching at the law school, because I was realizing that the people who are coming into the system didn't have a language about trauma. So my course became the first course in our law school to even talk about trauma. And that's all I talk about is trauma and giving language and to understand, because that's not something that we normally intersect with our legal training. And then this idea that imprints from the past can be transformed by having physical experiences that directly contradict the helplessness, rage, and collapse that are part of trauma. And whether people believe it or not, the court system can be full of trauma. It can be so reaped with trauma. And so what I'm constantly trying to do is saying, how can we give them a physical experience that directly contradicts this idea of we're just trying to rip families apart, or we're trying to break? How do we do that? And what are some ways for us to be able to do that gives them something physical in their relationship to be able to do that together? And that's my goal, is to really make sure that we are focusing on what is physical, what is real, because that which is real, that which is tangible, that is what they can touch, is a thing that can be transformative, not just for right now, but for generations to come. Let me skip. I always say that one of the things that trauma does it gives this idea that there is no map. And so sometimes what makes trauma difficult is the idea that it's not a straight line. And if we expect people to live in a straight line when they've endured so much trauma, then we are basically asking for all this confusion. It's not straight line. It is a meandering of all many different paths that we hope we're able to leave us in the same place. Let me give you a couple challenges, and then I'm gonna start working toward our solutions together. Some of the challenges I've seen as it relates to child welfare is that trauma, right? And when I say trauma, I mean really deep generational trauma. I see a lot of deep generational trauma. And I think what has been a challenge, especially in Wisconsin, because Wisconsin is, majority white, and we have a minority population here, Black, Latino, Hmong, indigenous, obviously, that are foundation to Wisconsin, that is steeped in a lot of trauma, but a lot of white trauma is not something that we have a space to talk about. We could talk about, the enslavement of African Americans. We could talk about the ways in which indigenous communities were treated in boarding schools, and the need for the Indian Child Welfare Act coming to place. We could talk about how Hmong coming to, and the ways in which Chinese and Japanese internment camps, and all of the pain that comes along with immigration, especially our Latino populations as well. But when it comes to white trauma, that's not a language. We don't talk about that. And so even when we have families who come into our system, nobody seems to know how to talk about their trauma and what that looks like for them too. So I put them all in the same spectrum of talking about the kind of historical deep trauma that a lot of them experience. I'll talk about mental health competence and mental health treatment access. Mental health, especially post-COVID, it just seemed like it has skyrocketed to a whole nother dimension. And then we're talking about, how do we get treatment access? Where do we go to get that treatment access? How is it accessible? And how do we get people there? We have transportation limitations for rural and certain urban communities. How do we get people to their appointments? How do we get them? We schedule them with 1 million appointments. You got to be here, got to do this, got to do this. Well, how do we get them there? How do we get them there? How do we make sure they can get there, get back home, get their kids from daycare? We're going to ding them for not making visits, but then we can't provide them transportation to get there and from there. And we're not even thinking about it. We're not even being creative about being able to make their approaches. They can't find housing, but then and if they do find housing, that housing may not be on the bus line. So there are a lot of things that happen with transportation we have to be conscious and thoughtful about. And then again, the rise of the opioid crisis, I think, and the social impact of overdose, child removal, strain on families, kinship relationships, and burned out law enforcement are big challenges, because if law enforcement and prosecutors are now charging families for, overdosing with children, then we're going to find a heightened increase of, more children being removed, more families trying to overcome. Maybe some parents are dying as a result of the opioid crisis and not being able to ever reunify with their children, but creating more trauma because now the children are trying to, move through spaces without their parents. So what I've tried to do as a part of my solutions is to use art. So I'll use art, not just like painting, but as a judge, how do we use art to help frame the conversation around trauma? And I think there are a lot of times when, we're not creative with the notion of art and trauma to really be able to reinvent and reorganize the messages that are often sent to communities. So I use art all the time, both art as a mechanism for support, but also art as a way to shape messaging. I love the idea of talking about inner child. When you start talking about inner child, it seems crazy to people because they be like, I got a little person living inside of me. What does that mean? Especially people who've never been in a therapeutic environment. But the way to explain it is to use art. And so I always like this clip because this clip from Antoine Fisher, because the art gives a poem. The poem gives language to the inner child, which I think a lot of people feel that brokenness. And in my trauma trainings, I spend time talking about that inner child because I believe that inner child is the center of what so many people feel and how they feel so much pain when it comes to the ways in which their lives have been touched. But this is just a small clip from Antoine Fisher.
Got this for you for having me over today.
You got a gift for me. Is it money?
No.
That's a poem. Can't see it without my glasses. Why don't you read it for me?
No, I'd rather you read it, please.
Who will cry for the little boy, lost and all alone? Who will cry for the little boy, abandoned without his own? Who will cry for the little boy? He cried himself to sleep. Who will cry for the little boy he never had for keeps?
Who will cry for the little boy who walked the burning sand? Who will cry for the little boy, the boy inside the man? Who will cry for the little boy who knew well hurt and pain? Who will cry for the little boy who died and died again? Who will cry for the little boy? A good boy he tried to be. Who will cry for the little boy who cries inside me?
Who will cry for the little boy, Antoine?
I will. I always do.
It's beautiful, Antoine.
I know, I told you I was good.
Yes, you are. You are good because you're honest. You're more honest than most people, even in your anger. The only thing you're not honest with yourself about is your need to find your own family, your natural family.
I feel like I need to look for him.
That'd answer a lot of questions for you.
Do I have any questions?
So again, that's why I say art is beautiful. You know, the poem is beautiful because it's really helping to explain the idea of the inner child and giving language to some of the things that a lot of the children who come into our space will feel, right? The crying of little children, the crying of little boy, but you can use art to be able to explain things that you can't just sit down at a conference and be able to get from people, but it's there. And you know, the Antoine Fisher is the name of the movie. And once you see it, you begin to get that touch of what that means. Like you're crying, and you know, and every time I see the movie, it's the idea, right? You know, who will cry for the little boy who cries inside of me? It's the notion that these children are in pain, they're hurting all the time, and I see it all the time. I see all these big bodies, big grown men, and you know, rough women on the outside, because nobody has taken the opportunity to listen, to be empathetic about their pain and what they're doing. So art becomes a very important way to give language without having to say a whole bunch at the same time. So, you know, use these kind of stories and these clips to help inform your organization. Let me skip to a couple of things real quick. And so a way for me to talk about art is also, how do I get messaging inside of our community to help transform how we think about parenting and family? And so a lot of times, partnerships in the community is essential, but sometimes, you know, trying to address trauma narratives and pain directly just does not work. And so a way for me to do that is to partner with organizations and partner to tell a different story. So this clip that I'm going to show you now is a way that I partnered with the DA's office so that we could begin to teach a different alternative parenting model. Now, some of y'all in Kentucky, y'all in the Bible Belt too, so y'all may not like this video, but it is an essential video to help stop some of the corporal punishment that we now see as happening in the lives of people. And this video is impacting so many people in our community because they play it all the time. They just, the TV stations picked it up and they just run it as a commercial. I guess it's a low political situation, but it has been one of those videos that adds so much value to the conversation about how we can support our young people, support our families that give a very different model to parenting. And I want to play this for you here.
Many of parents in our country have grown up with physical discipline, and it was believed that was the right way to parent a child. And a lot of times people look back and they say, well, you know, I experienced physical discipline and look at me, I'm okay. Is okay the measure that we want to measure our success by? Violence has been a part of our history. That doesn't mean we have to make it part of our culture.
When you think about corporal punishment, it is rooted in this notion of violence as the cure for everything that ails us.
In a sense, using physical discipline really sort of says, might makes right. It's not because it's reasonable. It's not because it's logical. It's because I said so.
Parenting is not about control. It's about making sure that they understand the values of what is inside of them. It's all about being very intentional. And when you are intentional, you give yourself and your child more of a beautiful relationship, not less. What we're trying to introduce is a different model that's rooted in, not in fear, but giving you permission to actually love, maybe in ways that you haven't been loved.
We need to ensure our kids are treating each other and others around them with dignity and respect. And that's really where the core is when you take physical discipline off the plate. We now know that parenting with love, dignity, respect is what really allows children to flourish. The research shows there is no positive effect from physical discipline, none. The best you can hope for is to have no effect at all.
I think the key is the young child that we make a difference in who's experienced trauma. And that could be crisis, it could be a treatment, it could be one event, it could be multiple trauma events. But what we know today about brain development, it can freeze a person socially and emotionally in that particular stage, is critical to be able to, in a timely way, be able to make a difference in providing stability, because that will prevent the future problems from occurring later.
Now, the hard thing when you're talking to parents about physical discipline, and if they've used it, to say, take that out of your tool bag. What do you replace it with? Especially if they're talking about teenagers. Where do they go?
If you want your child to be caring and kind and generous, then guess what? They have to see it through you. And parenting really should be not just do what I say, it should be rooted in be who I am. And if you want that little body to be loving and kind and generous and smiling and achieving high, where are they gonna get that from? They have to get it from you. Parenting is about consistency and love. It takes more creativity at times than just, going to grab a belt. That's easy, but, learning how to punish or give responsibility or to give accountability, whether it's coming from you or it's coming from other people, that creativity is what you need. It's really about being able to be there to help process what young people are going through.
It's not going to be easier parenting. It's really not. But it's going to have a real impact on your child's success, on your child's relationships, and on the community as a whole, because we hopefully will have less violence. We'll have less situations where people are thinking, you know what, it's okay to pick up a gun and fire a gun. It's okay for me to take what I want from you because I'm bigger and stronger than you.
It is only in human nature that we have been taught to do something that is against our nature. Just because it was done to you doesn't mean you have to do it to somebody else. We have to be the ones who decide what we want for our children moving forward. And just because something has been okay doesn't always make it right.
It is never too late. I think Maya Angelou sort of says it best. And, she said, you do the best you can until you know better. And then you do better. If we don't want violence in our community, we have to take violence out of our homes. And it starts with our kids.
My children won't even know what it is because it has never happened to them. So then when they share discipline and boundaries with their children, it won't be rooted in them thinking that they can go to the easy way of grabbing something and hurting their children. No, we were rooted in love. We were rooted in boundaries. And I think if we did that 1,000,000 times, we will reproduce a generation that's rooted in values and love, and maybe they won't hurt each other, and maybe they won't kill each other because we have given another generation the freedom to know what love is. Well, thank y'all so much. So that is one of the things that I've shared, because I just believe that trying to get that message across to our families is important. Like, maybe waiting till they come to court is a little bit too much, but giving them some tools to think about language, to think about, really is a way to think about the world. And so, we've been on this project together for a number of years, and now we're able to get videos, and we run it across the TV almost every night, just like they used to run negative videos across the spectrum related to violence in families. Now we have something that we can give, that can give some positive reinforcement. And I tell you, man, these children who come up to me from the community be like, I saw you on TV. Thank you for telling my mama not to hit me. And it's just funny. We all laugh, have a good time, especially when their parents are like, you can't tell the judge do that. But I tell you, it's a beautiful experience to do that. So now I want to talk about just how do we do courtroom stuff, just so I can make sure I leave you with a couple of things that are important to me. One, I want you to think about this. I do as a judge, what I'm always conscious about is how do I prioritize case alignment. And this particular case was one of my drug court participants, where she had what I call a dual case. This one, she was a young mother by herself, single mother, and we had to work together to align her cases, because she had all kinds of cases. When I say drug court, drug people are not in my drug court if they have to have a felony criminal offense. And so this is what we had to do to align to support her over time. She was, and I heard some people say, what do you do, right? How long? I don't know. It's not a magic number, but we try to make sure. She had two beautiful children. Remember, I said I try to look at these pictures. All children are beautiful, but she just had some exceptionally beautiful children that were just wonderful, beautiful. And she had a substance abuse disorder. Her drug of choice was heroin, that she had gotten addicted to by an old boyfriend. She had a felony criminal case related to this order in her children. She had overdosed with her children in the car, and she had got into a wreck. And so now that the system was involved, she couldn't wake up. So they took the children because they had to take her to the hospital, and there was no family resource. So she ended up, so she was in pain because she had a trauma history involved in the foster care system and a serious distrust of the system itself. She had mental health because of her trauma, and a lot of post-traumatic stress that she had experienced because of her work, her life, and what she had been through in her life. And so what made this case particularly interesting is because what happens in one case can influence the decisions in another case. So what I did was, because I am a juvenile judge, I consolidated, she wanted to consolidate her CHIPS case and her drug court case into one criminal case. And so, we had to get agreement from the guardian ad litem to make sure they didn't substitute on me or whatever. But the goal was, how do we make sure that we run these on parallel tracks? I know she has a substance use disorder, which is about heroin, and I know she's addicted to that. But also, how do I make sure that we work together to make sure that each of these cases are not splitting this mother in many different directions, but that we are aligning ourselves so it makes the path that she has to follow a lot easier in the process. And the picture I showed you was her graduating from drug court, and then me finishing counseling out her CHIPS case because she got her babies back and she's been doing well in the community. But for example, sobriety, it influenced child visitation. If she wasn't sober, they were going to cancel the visits. Her criminal cases dictated the potential penalties for violating her probation. If she did not do what she's supposed to do, obviously it was they could be pulling her at any time. And so by having her in drug court, I could also oversee what was happening with the probation agent, and I could be working with the DOC, Department of Corrections, to work with her. Housing instability, because she had 2 evictions on her record and housing instability was high. She needed residential treatment. And so we knew these needs were all at the same time. But by bringing them all together, we were able to come up with a case plan that made sense, because drug court provided access to residential treatment. because the county had contracts with drug court and residential treatment options that were not available in the CHIPS and the criminal court. If she had just done, the criminal case with probation without drug court, she wouldn't have had access to the residential services that the county could provide. And she didn't have to do the treatment in Madison, but she could do it throughout the state or wherever. But she needed access to that residential treatment to kick her into going into treatment options quicker. The CHIPS case provided a housing voucher and job support that was not available in drug court or the criminal court. So I could use the CHIPS case, and again, the CHIPS case is children needed protection services, because we could focus on reunification and the goals of reunification and strengthening the family and making sure that she has what she needed. But those services were not available in just drug court and criminal court, but they were in the CHIPS case. The drug court could provide specific case management access like UA and sobriety supports. We could give her a peer support specialist. We could provide some support for her mental health so that she wasn't shamed in her addiction, but that she had support services in place. And then the criminal court provided access to the Department of Corrections, which was very instrumental to ensuring that there was not a heavy-handed approach from the DOC on her probation, but that we met and we staffed her case along with the Department of Corrections to ensure that if there is non-compliance on certain issues, that we didn't mess up her whole case plan, but that we use the non-compliance as a tool to help better understand how we make sure that we can align these cases together. So when we think about this idea of how we work together, it was really working as a system together to support this young woman's ability to be able to get her children back. And that was so important to us to ensure that that was the case. And we prioritize that all the time. So when we think about as a system partner, how do we work together once we get these cases as judges, and because I can only talk as a judge, how do we make sure that we are aligning ourselves with what is in the best interest of these children and the families? And when she got her babies back, when I signed off on the order terminating CHIPS, and when I signed off on her graduating from drug court, it was a statement that the alignment of these services worked together in a way that was so seamless that, she's doing well, and her babies got their mother back, and she's addressing the trauma, and it gave a pause because we were conscious in caring for her long term. Somebody in the chat had always asked me about this idea of what does it mean to a father, right? The incarcerated parent. And so we started to partner with, and partnerships are big for me. We started to partner with what we call this program called the Odyssey Project. And it's probably one of my most favorite projects. If I had $1 million or $2 million, I give all my money to Emily and her team because of the work. I love them. When I worked at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I loved to support them and create opportunities and space for them because it was the essence of knowing. But we also have a sheriff that was just elected, Calvin Barrett, a Black man that was elected. White dudes doing good too. But this particular sheriff, he was elected with this idea, how can we do something differently? And we talked about, man, we got to support these families in court. And so this guy that you see here, he was one of my drug court participants, but he also ended up in jail. And so the question is, can you still be a parent even though you're incarcerated? And we created this program where parents and children can have contact, because generally there's no contact provision. And so they work on their parenting during the day. They know it's a privilege, but the idea that they get to parent and still have contact, physical touch contact with their children while they're doing activities with their babies, while they're incarcerated, has been such a blessing to all of us, to give us the opportunities, give us an opportunity to be, present with them. So when a parent that's obviously incarcerated, there are always these unique challenges. And in trying, how do we maintain the parent-child relationship? In Wisconsin, incarceration is not a statutory justification for terminating a parental rights. So, but the shift in access to prisons and jails also has created an issue with allowing parents to meet their conditions of return. So jails and prisons, whether state or federal, and local jails create these new barriers. And so we started having to be creative to say, all right, if we want the parents to meet their conditions, if we want them to still be connected, how do we do this? Assuming, of course, there's no reason, there's not been harm to the child in the process. How do we do this? So partnerships became essential. So the sheriff created a program in partnership with the UW-Madison School of Human Ecology and the School of Social Work. I love my social workers. Woo! I love my social workers. And so to advance the idea of parent connection while in jail. And so this is what we have been working on all these years, and it finally came into fruition. And so that allows for the parents and the social workers to work together to make sure that children are coming and visiting and staying connected in that local space, while they're serving sentences that are like less than 12 months and can have some contact with their children. And then in addition to that, the jail allowed access for the Odyssey Beyond Bars project. This is part of the Odyssey project in Dane County. But as a result of the project, parents are able to meet the needs of their conditions to support their continual growth. So now they have an outlet to then teach both parenting, reading, strategies, and then build on that collaborative relationship together. And I share this little video real quick, just talk about the project so that y'all can hear a little bit about this, because I think that's what we have to do when it comes to access, is that we got to also access jails too. So let's play a little bit about these guys who are going to talk about this project.
If we don't get the education in prison, we won't get the better jobs when we get out of the street, and most of us will go back to committing crimes. You know, the numbers are there about how higher education stops recidivism, you know, but and not just that, but it makes us better people. You know, I am a better person because of the education I received while I was in prison. You know what I'm saying? So I thank the DOC for that. And I thank the colleges that came in for that and the staff that did it. You know what I'm saying? I wish they had done it earlier.
You've just heard from Dominique Meek, a former Odyssey Beyond Bars student who is now out of prison and thriving in the Milwaukee community. Hi, my name is Peter Marino, and I direct Odyssey Beyond Bars, a college jumpstart program at UW-Madison for students incarcerated in our state prison system. Odyssey Beyond Bars is part of the UW Odyssey Project, co-founded by Emily Auerbach and Jean Faraka, which for 19 years has empowered students living in poverty to overcome obstacles, find their voices, and reframe their futures. We accept the Eisenberg Award with deep thanks and share this honor with many campus leaders who encourage our work with students in prison as part of the university's mission, including Chancellor Rebecca Blank, Provost Carl Schultz, and Interim UW System President Tommy Thompson. We also thank the Renebaum Foundation for allowing us to engage and excite more students than ever before. We'll now hear about the transformative power of education from some of our current students at Oak Hill. We thank you again for this great honor.
That comfortability level, it gives you the courage, like, oh, go ahead, read it.
I said, writing has been a favorite of mine, so, I mean, just getting this like basic knowledge, history about writing and what it can do and how you can grow from it and learn from it yourself. This is an amazing opportunity, and it need to continue on, be expanded. And again, like I said, I want to thank everybody who come in from UW and any other thing that's, you know what I'm saying, that can be expanded to, for giving us this opportunity to, like I said, to really learn and go forward with our education when we get out.
Even coming here, I jumped onto the opportunity to take this because I took Odyssey Project at Fox Lake. And it's not only getting you out of your comfort zone, but it's like almost encouraging you to feel like, to be a better person, I guess. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I took it, for my communication skills. And oddly, along the way, I'm discovering stuff about myself. But I like it because it's not an opportunity I had when I was out there, or at least I should say it's not an opportunity I wanted or even was encouraged to take. And so I encourage people to do it, you know. Put yourself past your comfort zone and do it.
The class atmosphere is great. Kevin is an awesome professor. He has a gift of engaging the class and, you know, getting the class to expand, you know, their writing abilities. You know, exploring things that you may have never thought about prior to the class, and he has a really good knack of doing that. What I'm getting most out of the class is confidence. The class makes me feel better about myself. It helps me believe in myself more, and it has me focused on wanting to become as educated as I possibly can.
I just wanted to give y'all, a little flavor of how we work, not just, who's in court, but how we work also with our partners in Department of Correction and correction to support those individuals who are incarcerated so they don't come back into the community without that. So I like this. I like this notion of us being able to work together. So I just want to give you a couple solutions, and then I'll open it up for any questions you may have as we get kind of down to the end of our time together. One of the things I give solutions is one that's thinking about culturally based mental health services contracts to provide in-home therapy services for families. That was huge for us to make sure that we're looking for those culturally based services. One thing I realized is that COVID really taught us about the power of having virtual connections. And so how do we utilize virtual tools to support mental health access and contracting with those individuals, not just referring, but making sure that they are in contract with the county so that we have priority in the services that we provide for them. So taking some of the money that we have and making sure we specifically enter into contracts that are supported. Secondly, build a family first model. That's what we built that allows county to intervene with preventative services before a formal petition is filed in the court system. By the time cases come to me, they are the worst cases because we would have already tried preventative efforts before they got into the formal system itself. So we've already looked at mental health, already looked at these things, and now the court order services come in because now we have to have access to foster care, residential treatment, all those other options that we have to oversee that may not be a part of the normal preventative services that we have up front. Let me see. And then I love this idea of CASA volunteers. So CASA is a court-appointed special advocates. I love to have CASA volunteers in our community because they are the ones who come into our court services and court system to be able to visit the kids, visit the family, and it's very important. If y'all don't have an operating CASA program, I'm on the national board. It is important to get one started because every community needs CASA workers, CASA volunteers inside these court systems to be able to support families, no matter how big or small the court system is. They need to be in there. They must be in there to provide those services. Think about nurturing housing and employment partnerships are important. With community-based organizations, whether it's faith community, Boys and Girls Club, United Way, we have to make sure that we're always in partnership and being active in partnership for those organizations in our community. And when I give you all this stuff, it's a lot of work, and most judges don't do this, but I think the product that we're trying to give for our community is much richer when you realize we need to be in community together. I include whole system partners in the juvenile judges meetings that we hold. Like I include everybody, like every social worker that is working, every case manager that is working, and we do everything by Zoom. So I don't bring people in and then just leave them. I bring everybody together because I want everybody to have the same information. Every social worker is just as important to me as a county prosecutor, as a DA or a public defender. Everybody's just as important to me. We have parent projects that give us families, attorneys. I want them in the room. I want to make sure that anybody who's defending parents with TPR also a part of our general conversations, because if you don't bring whole system partners together, everybody will hear different information and we won't build a collaborative system that works together. The Department of Correction is invited, the Sheriff Department, our police agencies are invited. Everybody who's working with our children and families are invited to the conversation, and we keep them monthly updated about what we're doing, what are some trends that we're seeing, and the things that we're seeing connected together in community. I also have this thing where we're doing, we also do some things where we do ride-alongs. So because we are a confidential system, it's important that we do ride-alongs, that we have ride-alongs that come in alongside of us because it's important, right? To educate the community about what we're seeing. Because if they're not educated, they can't really come up with solutions. I have people all the time that come up with this idea, well, we won't do this and we won't do that, we do this. I'm like, how about you come just sit and watch, and then you actually see whether or not the initiative that you're trying to support is actually going to make a dent in the problem that we see before us. And a lot of times they're not. I will tell you that because I am a little younger judge, I love utilizing Zoom as a platform. So I don't believe in bringing families in and to court unless I have to, because there's some kind of conflict that I need to mediate. But I don't want to bring people in. I want them to work their jobs. I want them kids to go to school. And if we can utilize Zoom as a method to just check in with reviews and status conferences, the only thing I want you in person for is when we can't bring some kind of resolution and we have conflict that we need to address right now. And then so everybody, I don't care what you do. Just the only thing is, some Zoom, it's called Zoom etiquette, because some people do not have Zoom etiquette and they don't know when they need to hit that mute button or turn that camera off. Sometimes I'll just leave it at that. I have been, yes, my eyes have been opened to some things that I would have can't never take back of seeing ever again. So, but I still think it's a good tool to use, so families don't have to come up here, pay for parking and lose their job, take time off. That's not going to meet our goals. I want them to be progressing. We do very family-specific tailored dispositions that allow for us to address the safety concerns. I don't like cookie-cutter approaches. What is it that this particular family needs so that we can make sure that we're doing everything we can to support them in this process? I love that. I love that idea of just doing very specific, nothing general. Like I told you, I'm big on including the incarcerated parents. So I work hard with my staff to make sure that the Zoom links are given to who's incarcerated. I don't care if they're in local jail. If they're in local jail, we bring them up for a hearing. If they're in jail, in the state jails, we make sure that we're working with the state jails to bring them into the hearing. If they're in federal, a little bit harder in the federal, but we still try to make sure we make efforts to make sure that they're included in that. I involve legal kids and parents in all of these conversations to make sure we're all on the same page about the expectations. And then we provide legal counsel for parents so they don't have an opportunity to fight within the system. I tell them all the time, you got a lawyer, use that lawyer to fight, to come into court. It's free, and it's important for you to be able to do this. We pay for those lawyers for a reason. That's your voice. That's how you get back in court. I love my social workers, but I tell the social worker does not run the case. I am responsible for that case. My name is on that. So if you have something that's in conflict, get us in court so we can solve it and move on together. And then as we kind of come to the end of this, I always want to say to people, the biggest lesson that I give to workers who are built in this field is to think about this idea that we are here to give kindness. And kindness isn't always about just what you say, it's about how you look, right? It's about how you look in this space and how you give that energy out to others. And I remember running across this little snippet from Toni Morrison, God bless her. And it changed my whole mindset. It changed my whole mindset. So everything about what I do in my work here at the court is about what this woman just said. Messed up my whole mind when I saw it, changed my whole perspective, and makes me realize that we have a lot of work to do that ain't about just what we say out our mouth, but it's also about how we give what our faces.
If you were to ask me in the early 90s, what is the big lesson you've learned from this show? I would have said that the common denominator in the human experience is that everybody just wants to be appreciated or validated. That got clarified in such a way that the hairs on my head rose when I heard Toni Morrison, who was on the show for The Bluest Eye, one of my favorite books of all time. I'd chosen her for book club selection yet again. And she said these words.
It's interesting to see when a kid walks in the room, your child or anybody else's child, does your face light up? And that's what they're looking for. When my children used to walk in the room when they were little, I looked at them to see if they had buckled their trousers, or if their hair was combed, or if their socks were up. And so you think your affection and your deep love is on display because you're caring for them. It's not. When they see you, they see the critical face. What's wrong now? But then if you let as I tried from then on, to let your face speak what's in your heart, because when they walked in the room, I was glad to see them. It's just as small as that, you see.
That is what I think is so profound, because that is how you learn what your value is.
That's right.
Not by what the person is saying to you, but what you feel. When I was
That was a huge aha, bing, 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 light bulb moment for me, because First of all, I was thinking about myself growing up, as everybody thinks about themselves when somebody's telling a story. I was thinking about myself growing up and how that.
We all know how it turned out for Oprah. So yeah, it just does your face light up. And I am big on facial expression when my kids come in there. Not just my kids, but also the people who come into the courtroom, man. I have this crazy memory, so I just remember details about people, but I just light up, man. I be all over the place. Ah, what? How you doing? Because if I have to do this face, like, they already know, man, it's gonna be a bad day. So I come in, man, I'll be happy, celebrating them, all that good stuff, because I just believe in the power of what we're doing together. So one of the things that we almost at our time, but one of the things that I want to make sure I close out with, in addition to that, is using your power to advocate for change in system. One of the big changes that I used all of these gifts and stuff was to take handcuffs off of kids in court. And so we used to have a policy having kids come in court for just because they were in the juvenile jail. So I used my best little preacher Martin Luther King voice, not only to do it here in our county. We took handcuffs off of kids in court, and I made sure I pushed for that. And because we didn't have any adverse reactions in terms of the children, I went and advocated for that for the state. And we were able to change the presumption. So in Wisconsin, no child has to come in court in handcuffs, belts, or restraints like we used to. And that has been a policy that a lot of people resisted because they just saw the kids as many adult criminals. But we really have shifted that presumption in our state. And so no child at any courtroom in our state, they still may be shackled up to court, but when they get to court, we don't have to do that anymore. And that's important to me. That's very, very important to me. So let me end on this. I tell a lot of the young people that I'm not only your judge, I'm your reflection. And what that means is that, I went through a lot of years watching my sister, trying to protect my sister from a stepfather who abused her for 12 years. And, for 12 years, starting at the age of 6 to the age of 18 years old, you get a sense that nobody listens, nobody wants to hear you, nobody cares. And so when I say that I'm a judge, a lot of people assume that you've never been through those things, because generally judges come from families that were lawyers or come from a certain cloth. But I was a poor kid from, and I would say I wasn't poor. I would say I was broke, a broke kid from inner city Fort Worth, Texas. I didn't know my father growing up. My mother married that dude. He was abusive. And as a result of that abuse, I ended up functionally literate, not being able to read. And I'll never forget the time that I had accepted a job bagging groceries. And, a lady called from a small school called Jarvis Christian College. And she said to me, "Hey, Everett, we heard you're a good student. Why don't you come try out college?" And I said, "I got a job bagging groceries." And she said something that made sense to me as an 18-year-old. She said, "Well, why don't you come try out college? If it don't work out, you can always go back to bagging groceries." So I went to college at Jarvis Christian College. And I remember going to school excited, but failing everything because college revealed to me I couldn't read. And but two women, man, Miss Daisy Wilson and Miss Margaret Bell, pulled me to the side and said, "Everett, you're a diamond in the rough, and we don't want you to give up on your dream of college." I mean, I was literally having my backpack on, getting ready to say, "Man, I done failed every class. I got like a 1.4 at midterm. I need to just give this up." But them two Black women sat me down. They told me, "Hey, you go study every night from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Put that boombox on your shoulder, and we want to see you work hard." And that's what I did every night. While everybody else was out there kicking it, I was 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. I was in there working every day. That's what I did. And, learn to read. Man, when you learn to read, it's like the whole world opened up to you. And when I learned to read, it just gave me a whole nother world. And that's how I was able to go to Morehouse and then eventually to Princeton and then to University Law School. But it's not without its pain, right? I still walk in that trauma. I still had to go years of therapy. I'm still in therapy. I still try to process the pain. I just lost my mother last year in a very sad and tragic and painful way. And so all those years of just being behind walls because you got to protect yourself to live, and mental hospitals and medicine and weight gain, it is just a lot. And, trying to be a good father and a husband when you've had so much come against you is even more of a greater challenge. So I tell these young people, I'm not just your judge, I'm a reflection. If you think I am special yeah, I'm not as special as you are. And so I try to use that privilege and that power and experience when I go out into the world as a judge, to try to make sure I'm keeping hope alive in our world and our community. And I tell my story. I'm not ashamed of it because I feel like if you tell it, then nobody has power over you for it. And so when I have young people in my courtroom, I do crazy stuff. I come off the bench. This little young man right here that you see in the little black robe, I go into the community and I do black robes and I put on them because I just want them to know that you can be more than just a rapper or or a basketball player, football player, some kind of athlete. It's fine if you want to, but you could be more. There's a lot. Be a judge. You could do that one day. And that young man who I put the black robe on, he was, his father was incarcerated, mother on drugs. Obviously, they thinking he's going toward prison, but he's not. He's doing something special. Doing something special. I like to hold babies in court, especially little white babies. So it's always good. I'm gonna adopt me a whole bunch of white children one day and give them like black names just so I can be in the mall telling them like, hey, Raheem, come here. And then they'd be like, what is that? Hey, come here, John Latifah, come here, girl. It'd just be fun to do. I'm sure y'all can do that in Kentucky and have fun too. I'm always out in the community doing things with our young people because I just believe it's important, trying to inspire our young black men and doing everything I can to make sure I keep hope alive and keep us all inspired to do the great work that all of us are committed to doing. So I know that I'm in that D9 family. Yeah, let's go to the good brothers up here to Q Sci-Fi. All right. So I want to make sure that we do this together. And I want to just make sure I stop here. And if there are any questions, Leah, that you think are important to me, for me to answer, I'll make sure I do that now.
I just want to say thank you again for presenting. I think Beth is also going to hop on. She has been watching the chat for any additional questions, but you are getting so many kudos in the chat box. People are very much appreciating your thoughts and sharing your stories with us.
The kudos are coming in so fast. I'm having a hard time pulling out any questions from chat that haven't been answered. It looks like everything that was put in the Q&A box has gotten a response. So if you put a question in chat and it's 1,000 chats above, go ahead and drop it in again or put it in Q&A and we can go through those quickly. Thank you so much, Judge.
Yeah, I thought I tried to get I was trying to answer the questions that they were coming in into the Q&A.
You were on it for sure.
Yeah, while we had the videos.
I think you've got a new fan base for sure.
Kentucky. Yeah, we'll come over. We'll come back again and do some more detailed stuff over time.
I wonder, and I don't know how many folks from our Judicial Commission on Mental Health were able to join today, but I wonder if there's any just words of wisdom you can share with those of us who are either on the commission or on work groups with that commission. The commission is made up of court personnel, judges, lawyers, and then the subcommittees have all the community partners, people with lived experience, behavioral health, child welfare, and such, and just some high points that maybe you would like us to consider that maybe we haven't thought of yet based on your experiences.
So, because I'm a judge, I'm not going to lie to you. I think, and this may sound, I'm just protecting of our space. I think in some ways we need to prioritize making sure that the judicial process is connected with the external resources so that when judges are making real-time decisions, that information is conveyed to them. I think too often the work is done outside of a judicial space, and then people are surprised that you have recommendations that come from courts that are inconsistent with what I believe are in the best interests of children and families, of people's mental health in general. And so it is very important that, all of those judicial partners are sitting at the table so that they are learning at the same time that you're teaching, right? And so they can begin to translate their decisions into things that can be beneficial to the long-term needs of the community. Don't assume that they know. The only way that they're going to know is that they are told and taught what those resources are on a consistent basis. Another thing, Beth, is to also remind yourselves is that judges rotate. So you have small county judges who don't have a lot of diversity in their case types, and they don't have a choice. They got 1 or 2 judges, they hear everything. So they don't have time to really listen and absorb all this stuff or specialize in it. And so those judges, you have to basically make sure that you're giving them a packet of things that they can pull from so that they can actually have the time when they're in the real time. And that's where the information sharing becomes even more crucial. So as you're building a system of care, I just say that one big system that has some of the biggest impacts over people, they have to be at the table being educated over time. And as somebody asked in the process, is a consistent cadre of educational opportunities that reinforce these these experiences for us. And then secondly, again, the prioritizing what partners you want to be at the table. I love universities. I love working with community-based partners. I think, they're underutilized. They sometimes piss me off because they got these rules that don't make no sense to me. But I like to be able to find those right people who are able to have that passion and then consistency that we can build over time, right? Because this is not going to be fixed overnight. It wasn't created overnight. And so you can't expect a real-time snap your finger and it will change. But I promise you, the stuff that we're seeing here in our counties, the reduction of, we've seen a steep decline in the number of cases filed, steep decline in juvenile arrest, steep decline in number of CHIPS cases. Why? Because we've been working intentionally on this for the last 10 years. And now that we have a rise in opiate, we have the services in place to support everybody's needs to be able to get better over time.
Thank you. I think our commission is moving forward really well with some of your recommendations. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I do see one additional question in the Q&A asking if you have an article name or can send out the link to the IEP violations discussion. This is from a restorative justice case manager specialist in 10 middle schools in Louisville.
Yeah, I'll have to look at, and maybe they can do some Google research, but the Google research, you can do, it's just IEP and federal laws, and I can try to send that to Leah, but it's just really the guidance that's supposed to be around IEPs. So, the federal guidance related to IEPs is that IEP children are not supposed to be put into what we call shortened school days unless there's a medical reason to do so. And I think a lot of school districts often use IEP as a way of enforcement versus realizing that they're supposed to have wraparound services for them. So I can make sure we get that information to you because it's very important, very crucial in our understanding of court systems and young people as well. And then I think I sent you the PowerPoint, at least on Google Drive, so that you all can have access to it and have access to the slides as well.
And our partner at Mental Health America of Kentucky put a link in the chat around from IDEA around IEPs as well. So thank you, Marcy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.